as you know, I'm a Stanford professor and founder of Coursera. Most people today will never have access to a Stanford class, but we're changing that, working with such great schools as Caltech right here, Stanford, Princeton, Georgia Tech, Penn, Yale, many others in the United States, as well as internationally, such places as the National University of Singapore, National Taiwan University, University of Edinburgh, Toronto, Melbourne, and many others. We're taking courses from all of these great schools and putting them online free for anyone to take. 30 of the 60 top universities in the world are working with Coursera, and this includes the #1 or 2 or both in 14 different countries. So many of you are faculty, and you might appreciate this, but let me share with you my story. As a Stanford professor, I used to teach a 400-student Stanford class. In fact, I still do. And about a year and a half ago, I put my class online, and it reached 100,000 students. To put that number in context, for me to reach a comparable size audience, I would otherwise have had to teach at Stanford for 250 years. And the fact that the technology now exists for one professor to teach 100,000 students, this changes the economics of higher education and has implications for a lot of the things we do. So what I want to do is share with you some of the mechanics and some of the technology that is powering MOOCs today, as well as say a bit about how I think technology is in the process of transforming higher education and transforming the role of the instructor and of our institutions. So let's see, with 100,000 students, who are the students that you can reach? This was one of my students, Akash from India, who wrote to say that coming from a small middle-class family in India, he would otherwise never have had access to a Stanford class. Or students like Jenny here in the US, a single mother of 39 years of age, who had been wanting to return to school and for whom the convenience of an online class allowed her to take care of her children and still go back to school. And when we think about broadening reach, this is one of the stories that inspires me. Another of our students was Daniel Bergman, who has a learning disability and who has not been able to have a meaningful education experience. He actually wrote to us to say that taking the UPenn Modern Poetry class at, I think, the 17 years of age, that was the first meaningful education experience he had ever had in his life. So, since launching the first few courses out of Stanford, I guess year and a half years ago, almost 2 years ago, we've grown significantly, and we now have many courses that span a broad range of disciplines. Let me show you some of our courses.
Welcome to Calculus.
50 million people are uninsured.
Models help us organize information. They help us make better predictions. They help us design more effective institutions and policies. Models, in short, just make us better thinkers.
And if we run this, we get unbelievable segregation.
So Bush imagined that in the future, you'd wear a camera right in the center of your head.
A love poem is a poem about another person.
Mills wants the student of sociology to develop the quality.
A hanging cable takes on the form of a hyperbolic cosine.
For each pixel in the image, set the red to 0. So let's see what that looks like.
And that vaccine allowed us to eliminate poliovirus.
Does Lufthansa serve breakfast in San Jose? Well, that sounds funny.
So this is which coin you pick, and this is the key possible.
0 from being passive, so passive becomes a best response.
So in large-scale machine learning, we'd like to come up with computationally reasonable. And today, with 80 partners, nearly 400 courses, and 3.6 million students, Coursera is by far the largest MOOC, or massive open online courses platform in the world. So let's see. Why do so many students want to take our classes? I think it is that, first and foremost, they are real courses. Each class begins on a certain day, and it runs for a fixed period of time. This is a plot of the web traffic in in my class as it ran over 10 weeks. And the regular heartbeats, those peaks, correspond to homework deadlines. Predictably, every time a homework is due, the 24 hours in advance web traffic spikes, thus proving procrastination is a global phenomenon. And as Jeff said, if a student completes a class and meets a high grading bar, they can also receive a certificate or similar that they can put in their resume, and that anecdotally many of them are successfully using to find better jobs. So let me show you what the student experience looks like. Like many others, we use video-based instruction, so this is what one lecture video might look like.
And generally we'll start with some set of players as an accepted starting point. And then we have to decide what are their strategies. So what are the possible actions that each player can take? Is passive and
English
active
captioning
enough
is useful for non-native speakers of English, as well as foreign language captioning. And that was hard to see. Shown there also was accelerated playback with the students speeding up the video to 1.5x speed. It turns out that in the normal classroom, right, all of us, when we teach, we tend to slow things down and blab and just make space to make sure that all the students are with us. In an online website, many students choose to speed up the videos and blast through the material because you miss something, you can just do an instant replay. And this allows students to make much more efficient use of their time. About 6 months ago, I actually met one of my students that had been watching me at 2x speed, for hours and hours. And when he met me in person, he came to me and said, "Wow, I'm so surprised. I had no idea that in real life you talk this slowly." Rather than posting online hour-long lectures, we encourage instructors to take concepts and break them down into 10-minute bite-sized pieces that is maybe better suited to the attention span of today's students. This allows instructors to also post optional prerequisite and optional advanced material. This allows students to navigate through the content in their own order and at their own pace, thus moving us away from the one-size-fits-all model of education. But the class is much more than just lectures, and we know that students learn best not by passively listening, but by practicing with the material. There have been many pedagogical studies, such as this one, which show that it is being tested on the material. That is, it is the homeworks, that's what actually causes learning to take place. In this study, retrieval practice, i.e. being tested on the material, results in substantially better long-term retention than study or even repeated study. Because of this, we built pervasively into our courses many opportunities for the students to take actions themselves, for them to do something or to practice with the material. Let me show you an example of what we call an in-video quiz. So in this video, there's audio here too, which is not important. In this video, student watches the lecture, and in the middle of the lecture, it pauses and a question pops up. Student gets to attempt an answer. It's not quite correct, so they try again until they get it right. They can see an optional explanation before the class moves on. And so I want to contrast this with my experience teaching at Stanford, and I suspect yours too, which is that in my Stanford class, when I ask a question in my classroom, usually, half of my students are still madly scribbling away, trying to write down the last thing I said. And invariably, there'll be that one smarty pants sitting in the first row that just shouts out the answer. Then I, as an instructor, feel really good that someone answered my question, and the class moves on with only one student having gotten to engage with a question. In contrast, on the website, in the middle of a lecture, the video pauses and a question pops up, and every student gets to attempt an answer. Every student gets instant feedback on whether or not they're understanding the material. So I think it's ironic that a website can actually be more interactive and give students more feedback than even a large lecture class. Beyond the in-video quizzes, the quizzes right in the middle of the lectures, most of our courses also have more serious weekly homeworks that often take students hours to do. This includes the ubiquitous multiple choice to short answer questions. We're asked, who discovered general relativity? You give a short answer to that. We have very sophisticated auto-grading of various different types of homework. On the bottom right is an example of computer-graded math expression checking, where we ask what's the derivative of sine x over x, and the software understands all of the correct and mathematically equivalent ways of writing out that math formula. More advanced features, sort of in beta, is auto-graded mathematical theorem proving, where instead of having students where we ask students to do mathematical derivations, and the software automatically checks that every single step in a mathematical derivation is well justified, and gives them instant feedback if they try to do an operation in a proof that they have not substantiated. We can also grade arbitrary forms of structured data. So in a computer program, we can grade electronic circuits automatically. We can grade spreadsheets automatically. So you can have students build a financial model and upload a financial model in the spreadsheet to auto-grade it. And we also have sophisticated grading of computer programs. And this is useful not just in computer science classes, but also in mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, various types of the more quantitative econometrics type classes. Let me show you just one example of auto-grading of computer programs. So in this homework, the student is asked to do a color correction exercise. The student is writing the solution, the program, right into the web browser. The student hits run, and the output is not quite correct. Statue of Liberty is looking a bit green. So the student goes back, edits it, runs it again, and it says output correct at the bottom. So that's the level of interactivity of some of our courses. One nice thing about teaching a class online is that we have the resources to allow a student to submit a piece of work multiple times. At a normal Stanford class, if a student submits a piece of work and they get it wrong, what can you do, right? They get back, they grade their homework, it says 60 out of 100, they put it away and the class moves on. And that's because at Stanford, we have the resources to grade a student's homework only once. On the website, we can provide tools to help instructors create randomized quizzes, where in this example, the instructor gives several correct and several incorrect options, and the first time a student attempts a quiz, they see some set of right and wrong answers, and if they don't get it right, we encourage them to go home and study, come back, try it again, see different options, and a computer has the patience to allow a student to attempt the work multiple times. This is a teaching technique called mastery learning, where we encourage students to come back and attempt a piece of work over and over until they get it, so that they have a firm foundation to build on before moving on to the next piece of content. I think education shouldn't be about telling students, you're a B student and that's a C student and that kid is an A student. I think that education should be about helping every single student to succeed. And I guess it was Sao Khan that I think once said something very profound, which is that in today's education system, what is held constant is the amount of time you spend on a piece of material, maybe 10 weeks. And what is variable, what changes between students, is the degree to which the students get it. Some students get it and they're A students, and some students don't get it and they're B or C students. But instead, I think it should be the other way around. I think what should be held constant is that every student should succeed, every student should get it, and what can be variable is that some students get it on their first try, some students get it on their 5th try, and students can spend variable amounts of time before they succeed at mastering the material. So website allows us to do this. We've been able to show also, using data from our courses, that this is actually a study done by EPFL instructor, Professor Odursky, in which he was able to show that by allowing students to submit multiple times, student scores do improve substantially. Moreover, if a student attempts one piece of work multiple times, then on their first attempt at the next piece of work, their score also improves. And what that means is that having a firm foundation to build on allows you to succeed better at the next piece of work as well. Quantitatively, 3 points of improvement in problem set 4 translates on average to 1 point of improvement on problem set 5, on your first attempt at problem set 5. So these are all the things we could do with auto-graded or computer-graded homeworks. I guess I learned an interesting lesson. A little over a year ago, Daphne, my co-founder, were visiting UPenn, University of Pennsylvania. And I guess I learned that if you go to a poetry professor, and if you show the poetry professor your, shiny new auto-grading multiple choice technology, and if you try to convince a poetry professor to teach his class using multiple choice, I learned that he will invite you to exit his office. So to enable more open-ended forms of homework to be developed, we put a lot of effort into developing a system for grading tens or hundreds of thousands of more open-ended homeworks. So there's a technique called peer grading, of asking students to grade each other's work, which has been well studied in small classrooms of, say, 50 students. And peer grading, having students grade each other's work, has been shown to give highly accurate grades in small classrooms. And in fact, self-grading, where students grade their own work, is even more accurate. What we did was we took the idea of peer grading and combined it with the computer science idea of crowdsourcing. And today we've run by far the largest peer graded classes in the history of education. And what this does is it allows, say, a poetry instructor or a history instructor to assign a homework where students are asked to write a 300-word essay. And students, and one professor can't grade 100,000 essays, but the students can all grade each other's essays. So let's see, and this has enabled some of the most amazing and creative homework exercises to be offered. In this UPenn Wharton class, students were asked to design interesting objects, and these were some of the different student solutions submitted to their class, where the job was to design something, build it, take a picture, and upload the picture to the website for students to grade each other's work. So the way peer grading works is, as a student in one of these classes, you would be asked to first do the work, maybe write an essay or design something, take a picture. Having done the work, you will then be shown an instructor-supplied grading rubric that teaches you how to grade other students' work. Then you would be asked to demonstrate proficiency in grading. So grade a few pieces of work that the instructor has also graded and show that you're assigning grades similar to what the instructor had assigned. And then finally, you'll be asked to grade, say, 5 other students' pieces of work. And in exchange, you get feedback from 5 other students about your own work. So today, we've run peer grading in probably 80, 90 different classes. And we and our partners have done studies measuring the efficacy of peer grading. This is a study done by Mitch Denier at Princeton University. I got this slide from him, and he was able to show, in the case of his class, that peer grading, the vertical axis, results in grades that are, let's say, highly correlated with the teacher or expert teacher assigned scores. And moreover, in addition to giving, I want to say, fairly accurate grades, peer grading is certainly giving very useful qualitative feedback to the students. So this combination of auto-graded technology together with peer grading has been key to enabling Coursera and our partners to offer courses that span many different disciplines, including the humanities, the social sciences, the basic sciences, the engineering, business, law, finance, many other areas. So let's see. From the student perspective, I've talked about the lectures, I've talked about the homeworks. The third and final major component of the student experience is the community. It turns out that when you teach a class with 100,000 students, it's much easier to build a community than if you have only 100 students. Having a class with 100,000 students also means that no matter what time of day you are awake thinking about something, there will be someone in some time zone awake at the same time as you and thinking about the same thing, and they can therefore discuss it with you. In a class of 100,000 students, one professor cannot answer all of the students' questions, but we developed a discussion forum on which students can pose questions and other students can answer their questions. And so, because of the sheer number of students on our website, the last time we measured it, when a student posed a question on our discussion forum, the median response time, that is how long you have to wait before a student answers your question, is 22 minutes. And getting a response, a personalized response to your question in 22 minutes, that's frankly a far better level. There's a much faster response time than I personally have ever been able to offer to my 400 students at Stanford. I just don't answer my email every 22 minutes. And with our online discussion forum, we have also a record of all the student answers, and this is the content generated by students in the discussion, in the lecture notes that students write out, becomes an important piece of the student experience as well. And so students generate perhaps as much content in some classes as the instructors do. And so we have heard both in surveys and anecdotally from students that the fact that you're not studying in isolation, but that you're working, but that you have tens of thousands of classmates to work through the content with, allows students to feel much more supported as they're working through the material. Beyond the online community, we also have a healthy and thriving global community of learners that are getting together to study Coursera courses. When I travel, I sometimes go to student meetups. I've attended student meetups in Beijing, Singapore, London, San Diego, California, and we have students getting together all around the world to support each other in taking these sorts of MOOCs. So I was editing, and so talked about the student experience taking the course, and I guess Jeff raised just now the issue of verification of student identities. So until recently, all of the certificates that we had been printing, that everyone had been printing, were not verified, which is why we have caveats at the bottom saying, we don't know who the student is, this is just some name we got off the internet, we don't know if they really took the class or if this name is even real, right? So, and we had to print those sort of certificates because we just don't know who these students are. But in order to create a more valuable credential for students, in February this year, we announced it in January, rolled it out in February this year. We announced a new program where we would print for students verified certificates. So the way that works is when you sign up for a course in the signature track program, we ask you to hold up your ID to the webcam so we can verify your real name and match it to your face. And then we also use technology. Every time you submit a homework, we take a picture of you with your webcam. And it turns out also that your typing rhythm, that is the rate you type on your keyboard, is fairly unique to you. It's kind of hardwired into your brain, and you can't type the way that I do. I can't type the way that you do, even if we were to try. So using a combination of taking your picture, using the webcam, and using your unique typing pattern, every time you submit a homework, we verify that it is you. And based on that, we and our university partners that are participating in this have begun to issue verified certificates that come with the brand of the university as well as with Coursera's logo. Because verifying the student's identity runs up costs on our end, this is something that we do have to charge a modest fee for, so around $50 per class, maybe on average. One interesting aspect of this is that we found that signature track has become a mechanism for increasing student retention as well. So overall, in the class, of the students that sign up for a signature track, retention is much higher with maybe about 75% of students that sign up for the signature track will pass the class and earn their verified certificate. The interesting data, one interesting piece of data is if you look at all the students that are highly committed. So at the start of the class, run a survey and ask, do you think you complete this class? And even just looking within the population of students that on the first day of class say they're highly committed, swear up and down, I'm going to watch every video, do every homework, I'm highly committed to finish this class. Even within that population, the subset that signed up for signature track and put money down, pay $50 for the signature track, is still more likely to complete the class, which maybe goes to show that you're more likely to stick with the class when you've put money down or when you have skin in the game, is the term we use in Silicon Valley. And so I think of this as a way for students to pre-commit to finishing the class and to thereby hopefully increase completion rates as well. With our agreement with our university partners, any revenue that comes in through the signature track or through other programs is shared between us and the university partners. Having just launched this, we brought in a healthy amount of revenue. On the high end, we've had a single class bring in $50,000 to $80,000. On average, is closer to the $10,000, $15,000 range per class. But we believe that signature track is, since Jeff asked about business model, our projections are that signature track in isolation will keep this effort sustainable financially. Although we still have a long ways to go to improve its efficacy. Although maybe just a side comment though, I think all of us are educators, and so when we rolled out signature track, within the company, within Coursera, we felt very strongly that we need to serve the neediest people in our society. And $50 to most of us in this room might be the cost of a nice meal, but to a poor kid in India, a poor kid in Africa, $50 is a completely unthinkable amount of money. So because of that, prior to rolling out Signature Track, all of us within the company actually felt strongly that to a poor kid in India, a poor kid in Africa, we need to offer financial aid. And so if there's someone that would really benefit from the Signature Track but cannot afford it, we ask them to fill out a one-page financial aid application, and then we just give it to them for free. I kind of speaking as a professor and as an educator, I kind of feel like that if we aren't serving the neediest in our society, then no matter how lucrative something might be, I'm sort of frankly just not that interested. So let's see, my professional background is in the data sciences or in machine learning or data analytics. One of the things that excites me about teaching these massive classes is the science of learning that this can drive. The data we can collect in a massive open online course is unprecedented in the history of education. If you think about a typical education study, if you have an idea for pedagogy you want to test out, you might have an experiments group of 20 students and a control group of 20 students. In a MOOC, we can easily deliver an experiments group of 20,000 students and a control group of 20,000 students. But it isn't just the sheer number of students we can test different pedagogies on. It is also the detail of the data we can collect. We log every mouse click, we log every keystroke, we have every homework submission, correct or incorrect. We know which students fast-forwarded through part of a video, or which students played which parts at 2x speed. We know when a student posted a discussion forum and what they read, as well as what they wrote. And this detail and magnitude of data is unprecedented in the history of education. I think Google, Amazon, Facebook have been able to understand users to the extent they can because of the data they can collect. In contrast, education today is far too much an anecdotal science. And with the data that we're finally able to collect, I hope to turn education into much more of a data-driven science in the way that maybe a large-scale computational biology and physics is today. And I think that the data will allow us to open a new window into human learning. So let me show you just, we've done per the large numbers of dozens of studies by now, but I'll just show you two quick examples. Turns out at Stanford, one of the debates we had was, should you stick the instructor's face in the video? Among Stanford faculty, we actually had endless debates. Is putting an instructor's face there allows students to form more of a connection with the instructor, but maybe the instructor's face is distracting, so you should take it off and just focus on the content. And we had, you won't believe how many debates we had on this one question. So we thought we can now test this. 20,000 students are in group A, 20,000 students are in group B, and we can now measure who does better on the homeworks. So what's the answer? The answer is we don't know. Because students in group B complained so vehemently that they were bored that we had to take everyone out of group B and put in the instructor's face for this particular set of videos. More seriously, here's a different example on which the data was key to giving us a positive result. So in one of our classes, I guess it was actually my class, a funny thing happened. So I assigned a programming homework, and 2,000 students, right, 2,000 students submitted exactly the same wrong answer. It had never happened to me before. So this is a plot of all the incorrect submissions, and shown on the upper left-hand corner is the 2,000 nearly identical incorrect solutions. We looked at a small sample of those incorrect solutions and found that every one of them had taken 2 steps of a mathematical algorithm and exchanged the order in which they did those 2 steps. So this allowed us to generate a custom error message so that when the 2001st student submitted the same wrong answer, we then showed them a message saying, consider the order in which you're doing these 2 steps. And this allows students to much more quickly correct the misconception and move on. So if you think about it, if in a normal Stanford class, if 2 out of 100 students submitted the same wrong answer, you probably won't even notice. Instead is when 2,000 out of 100,000 students that submit the same wrong answer, that's what gives the instructor a very strong signal that there is something to be looked at here. So I think it's ironic that in order to achieve personalization at the level of a custom error message that tells students exactly what they need to look at, to achieve that, what was needed was to teach a class of 100,000 students, because that's what gave us the data that made personalization possible. Actually, maybe I'll skip this in the interest of time. All right. So since most of us are instructors in this room, I want to just quickly show you what the instructor tools are like and what the experience of an instructor is of creating a MOOC. It turns out that I think of a MOOC platform as having two main pieces, or in some case one piece, but there's the student interface, or the content consumption interface, and then there's the content creation interface, or the instructor interface. It turns out that student interfaces are much easier to write. The difference between student and instructor interfaces is sort of the difference between a text document and a text editor computer program. And so Coursera, being a platform, we're in the business of writing text editors, which is a much harder piece of technology to build than to write a document. But when you sign up for public MOOCs, you kind of don't see this. So let's see. We have many different setups for instructors to record content. This is one that I use, but there are at least, half a dozen different flavors of this. For instructors, depending on how you do it, some instructors record in front of a live audience. Many choose to record in front of a studio, and it's kind of a relaxing experience. If on a Sunday morning I wake up and I feel like recording a 10-minute video, I walk to the recording studio, kind of brush my hair, and then record a 10-minute video, and it gets posted online shortly after. It's a kind of a nice, relaxing experience to do that. And then, because of the number of students we have, we also put a lot of effort into developing dashboards and easy-to-use interfaces to allow instructors to get a sense of what's going on in their class. These are some of the course dashboards that give the instructor an aggregate sense of what's happening with your 50,000 students and how much activity there was in quiz 3 versus quiz 5, and what are the quiz answers that students are submitting, to quickly get a sense of what's happening with 50,000 students. And I guess these are other dashboards, showing traffic on the site and so on. Because many of our instructors are non-technical, we also put a lot of effort into making sure the interfaces are usable even for non-technical faculty. So that, say, the teaching assistant of a poetry professor should be able to go in and use the website to create online content. I have to say, there's still room for improvement. There is, I think our website is usable. I think it's pretty good. I think it's far better than any other alternative, but there is still room for improvement. I think most other, actually, as far as I know, all the other alternatives still require that instructors be essentially programmers and write code. But kind of easy to use interfaces. And because we've been working with 80 university partners, because I guess we invented most of the modern MOOC technology, we've been working with our partners to collect best practices in pedagogy. And so we've kind of extensive best practices for pedagogy of how to create MOOCs, as well as how to use the content for on-campus education. And we share this with all of our university partners and to help our university partners to quickly, understand best practices. And I have to say, I've learned so much working from our university partners. I could tell you stories, I guess, but so many times our university partners have totally blown away my preconceptions about what a MOOC should look like. And we routinely try to collect the best practices from our partners and kind of put them, rapidly disseminate what we and our partners are all learning about the space. And I guess finally, it turns out that one strong desire for many instructors is to have tools to extend the platform in whatever ways you want. So it turns out that maybe you have a physics instructor that wants to plug in a physics simulator, or an instructor that wants to do something totally different. Turns out that running software that can serve hundreds of thousands of students is hard. And what we wanted to do was make the platform extensible, but for us to bear the burden of waking up at 3 a.m. if the website goes down. So what we did was we have been putting a lot of effort into developing an app platform, which is a set of open APIs that makes it relatively easy for anyone, your instructors, third parties that want to extend the platform to build simulators, multi-student games, note-taking games, advanced autograders, adaptive learning software, however you want to extend the platform. But for us to try to support those modes and mechanisms, but so that kind of within reason, so that you can write one small copy of the software that runs on one computer, and then kind of within reason, we'll do most of the legwork for you to take your software to scale it up from running for one student to running for 100,000 students. So just as iTunes, Facebook, Android today are app platforms, we're developing this sort of educational app platform to make it easy for you and others to extend the platform and to adapt it to whatever novel needs you might want to experiment with. So far I've been focusing a lot on the MOOCs, on teaching the hundreds of thousands of students out there. One thing that's important to us is the use of this content for on-campus instruction. So, earlier Jeff asked, is the lecture a terrible way to deliver content? I guess there's this quote that, often been cited, which is that college is a place where professor lecture notes go straight to the students' lecture notes without passing through the brains of either. And I think that the modern lecture was invented about 400 years ago when there was one copy of the book, and the instructor's job was to stand in front of the room and flip open the book and read from the book to broadcast the lecture. And that's how we wound up with classrooms that look like this. But today, I think we have much better ways of broadcasting content than the lecture. So what we and many of our partners have been doing is to implement what's called blended learning, or the flipped classroom, in which we take high quality online content produced either by one of our current partners or produced by one of our partners, let's say, and an instructor can take content produced by one, can adopt content from one of our partners and send their students to watch this content online. And what this does is it frees up the instructor time from broadcasting the lecture, and students can then get the content from the convenience of their own home in a much more interactive format. 10-minute videos, you get to do an instant replay if you miss something. You can play things back at 1.5x speed. You get the in-video quizzes, so you're not just passively listening, you get to practice with the material. But students get the content at home. And what it does is it frees up the instructor time from content preparation, frees up a lot of instructor time from manual grading of homeworks, so that the instructor can then spend most of their time in the classroom actually interacting with students and engaging with active learning. I should say, Jeff mentioned in some cases there was instructor unhappiness with so being forced to adopt content from others. We have not had any of that sort of backlash, frankly, with the courses adopted from Coursera. And I think the reason is we try to support the local instructor to augment the content. So I don't believe in a model where you take someone else's class and you force an instructor to basically teach someone else's class. I think in order for the content to be adopted, it's important that the local instructor be able, if they choose, to augment the content, to localize it and kind of modify it to better suit their own local students. Because of that, for this model of letting Coursera partners adopt each other's content, we've had substantially less, I don't want to say almost no, maybe almost no backlash. I can't think of any right now, I'm sure there is, but almost no backlash of the sort that Jeff mentioned. And I guess this allows instructors to spend the classroom time engaging with students rather than lecturing with students. There have been many pedagogical studies that show that these more interactive modes of learning result in much better student attendance, engagement, and learning. This is not a 1 or 2% improvement in student learning. This is like a 30% improvement in student learning. And so in my class today, my class at Stanford, what I usually do is look at the instructor interface, which we put a lot of work in, to look at an instructor dashboard to figure out what questions students are getting right or wrong on the multiple choice questions that they did on the website. This allows me to go into the classroom to do just-in-time teaching, where I can focus the discussion on what students are getting wrong. Your instructors would be able to also go into the classroom to then post problems on the board and say, you all watch the lectures last week, and I know you watched the lectures because I made you all of you do a quiz that was due right before class. And then, here's a problem. Why don't you sit in small groups and work on problems together? And the student experience of walking into a classroom, not to be lectured at, but to sit with your best friends and work on applications, work on problems with your best friends, that makes it a much more interesting experience for the students. Those are some of the other activities that we and our university partners are engaging in. We also share with our university partners kind of extensive best practices for how to implement the flipped classroom, but it's a very different experience. I can tell you, my classroom is much noisier today. It's not me standing in the front of the classroom lecturing. In a classroom of 100 students, you might have 50 discussions going on, and I walk from team to team to team to have short conversations with them. And you find that you have much more time as an instructor to mentor the weaker students, to talk to the stronger students about research, to get to know your students much better. With content increasingly available online for free, I think what this does is allows instructors to move up the value chain to where our role is no longer just broadcasting content, but actually providing interactions and mentoring for our students. And on that as well, one of the technology pieces we're building is improved support on the website for small study groups, whereby maybe an instructor wants to teach 100,000 students, but 30 of those students are my Stanford students, and I want to create small spaces just for them to discuss. And so earlier today, we announced that Coursera has partnered with 10 state university systems whose enrollments total 1.25 million students in the United States. I think Coursera so far has done a great job giving a free online education to continuing learners. But if we are to move the needle on helping more students earn degrees, which is clearly very important in today's world, then in the United States, we need to go where the degrees are being granted, and 70% of US students today are enrolled in state university systems. And so I think our partnership with the 10 large state university systems announced earlier today will help accelerate the movement of the country, frankly, to these blended learning models, which I think will transform the role of the instructor. It will be, a little scary for some instructors, but I think it will ultimately be much better for the students, and I think much better for the instructors too. So just to finish, what is the impact of MOOCs? I think one impact of MOOCs is lifelong learning. About 80% of our students already have a bachelor's degree or better, and I think working adults today, by and large, don't have very good access to high quality education opportunities. If you have children, it's tough to hire a babysitter twice a week to attend night class at a community college. With online courses, we can connect anyone to a great education, and I think all of us today need regular booster shots of knowledge in order to stay current in today's rapidly changing world, and we are connecting all of these people to a great education. And beyond that, I think MOOCs are also helping us to deliver an education to everyone, including the people that otherwise would not have access to a reasonable quality of education. And I think this is important, not just for the students getting access, but I think it's important for all of us, because maybe the next Albert Einstein might today be in a poor village in Africa, and if only we can deliver her a great education, maybe she will be the next one to invent something that will make the world a much better place and make life better for all of us. Thank you.
So do we have questions for Andrew?
Andrew, thank you for a very interesting presentation. I have a question in relating to education, technology and course preparation. I know for a fact today that professors are really scared of technology and scared of using technology. So is there, in your experience, can course development be totally agnostic to technology and totally independent? And then when the course is fully developed, the technologies take it and put it into the chunk according to the logical sequence that is needed and roll it out from a technology perspective. Yeah.
Wow, that's an interesting question. Boy, my gut feeling is that in the near future, I think that would be challenging. You know, many universities today are teaching somewhere between, 1 and 30 MOOCs. And so it will be often the early adopters that are somewhat more comfortable with technology that would be the first ones to jump in to create the MOOCs. Having said that, the vast majority of our instructors are not technical people, right? They're people in the humanities and law and business and in non-technical areas, but these are humanities professors that are perfectly comfortable using text editors and email and the web and so on. I think the technology is too immature for someone who's not comfortable with these sorts of tools to create a MOOC. Maybe over time, the technology will become easier to use, but I don't think that'll be for a while. Yeah.
Other questions?
So you speak. One thing that you spoke to and that sort of is associated with this also in other people's conversations is that we can optimize education. So we can, for example, learn a lot from the data that we collect and have maybe better ways of breaking down concepts and so forth. I wonder whether that's such a good idea. We have optimized in our life lots of things, and we end up with iceberg lettuce that has lost all flavor. And that honestly worries me, is that as we optimize, we know what comes out of things that are products that are marketed according to focus groups. They're not necessarily such good products in some other dimensions. And I'm personally very concerned that we're going down the same path here. I wonder whether you can comment on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I think iceberg lettuce is an interesting one. I think modern agriculture has made the world a better place. I think many of us, I tend to buy organic vegetables, right? Many of us prefer our organic vegetables, but the reality is most people on our planet today cannot afford organic vegetables, and their choice is between iceberg lettuce and starvation, right? I mean, it is what it is. And I think at least I hope education is different. I think Google, which is an amazing service, I think it's made all of our lives much better, regardless of our personal feelings about Google, would not be able to deliver the amazing results it does today if not for the data and the optimization. And I hope that because it is educators leading the conversation, it is educators making these decisions, I hope that we'll all use the data to optimize for the right thing, which is benefit to students.
Other questions?
Andrew, thank you very much for your excellent presentation. My name is Ming Hua from Nanyang Technological University. I'm very much interested to see how this in the looking into the future, it is not just technology driving everything. I think at the end of the day, I think it has to be pedagogy to be driving technology rather than technology is driving the rest. So on the issue of learning and teaching, I think one of the key ideas is really how do we teach students to have this transfer taking place, transfer this whole thing about higher order thinking. And then I'm just wondering whether in Coursera kind of platform or in some of the application that you're looking forward, whether we can somehow incorporate some of this higher order thinking skill into the courseware design, including the assessment kind of method, so that we can make sure that this transfer is really taking place. Because sometimes professors are teaching, but you don't know whether they really learned. I think that's my question.
Right. So let's see. Let me say a word about the seriousness of the assessments, and then there is higher order thinking, which is another step beyond. So, another personal story. So last Christmas Eve, last Christmas Eve I was in Hong Kong with my dad, and as is tradition in my family, my father and I went shopping for electronics on Christmas Eve. But one thing was different this year, which is that at 2 o'clock, when we're in the electronics shopping center in Hong Kong, I was geeking out, right? I was having fun. But at 2 o'clock, my father looked at his watch and he said, "Oh my God, it's 2 o'clock. My homework is due in a few hours." And then he ditched me right there to go back to his hotel room to do his Coursera homework. So many of our students take hours to do the homeworks, and when they complete the homeworks, many of the instructors, some of the more formal studies are ongoing to show efficacy, but many of us as instructors feel like, you know, if a student can do these homeworks, I personally will stand behind my machine learning students. If they've done those homeworks, they know machine learning. Having said that, there are still further studies of efficacy that do need to take place. And as for higher order thinking, I think, you know, there are some things we can't do well yet. So we don't really know how to offer capstone project style courses, like long projects. Having said that, with peer grading, I guess you saw some of the designs, right? Students building very creative objects. We have had fairly sophisticated projects. We've had students write essays that require fairly deep analyses of history or poetry or of the finer points of the law. Yeah, I think there is room. I think there is I totally agree that there's a lot of stuff to be invented still for the pedagogy. I think we're still in the early stages, but I think we're, you know, slowly moving in those directions.
We're going to slide. We've got a break of half an hour, so we can afford a few extra minutes here. Questions?
Thank you very much, and your presentation is very interesting, also very impressive.
Thank you.
So let me see. So my question is that, you know, when in the near future, and for students, it's very easy, also free of charge, can take courses like by means of the Coursera platform, take courses of like Princeton and Stanford, so and it's very easy for them. So my question is how the university authority or university to cultivate the talents, how university contribution for on-campus students?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, you know, sort of, if anyone can go online and take a Princeton class for free, why on earth would anyone still pay, you know, $200,000 for a Princeton degree, right? Is that kind of the, I think the real value of going to our great universities, you know, the Stanfords, the Princetons, the Shanghai Jiaotongs, is not just the content. I think content is increasingly free on the web anyway, whether we like it or not. I think the real value of students coming to our universities is for the interactions with the professors, the interactions with other equally bright students. And I think with the flipped classroom, we are freeing up, right? By putting the content online, we're freeing up even more time for professors and students to interact with each other, maybe in the classroom, maybe elsewhere. And so we're creating more of that, you know, value of students going to universities. You know, I think we serve two populations. There is the hundreds of thousands of students out there for which we cannot economically afford to give one-on-one interactions with a professor. So the hundreds of thousands of students out there, we can let them take a free MOOC but not have the one-on-one interactions. But for the students that can get access to our campuses, I think that's a different population, and we hope to increase the quality of the education they get by giving them even more of the interactions and one-on-one mentoring. You know, I guess Jeff just now raised a question, let's just kind of put it directly, right, which is, will MOOCs replace professors? And to answer that, let me invite you, like right now, to think back on when you were a college student and think about your favorite professor back in college, right? Maybe you had a professor that you had amazing conversations with, that gave you mentoring, gave you advice for your career or your life, maybe someone that changed your life. For me, I'm thinking of some of my own mentors, Professors Andrew Moore, Professor Michael Kearns, that to this day, I'm somewhat mystified why, you know, my mentors were so patient answering all of my silly questions when I was a very naive 18-year-old kid. And I'm just incredibly grateful still to my favorite professors. So think about your favorite professor back in college. And now let me ask you, do we think we can replace this favorite professor of yours with a computer? I think the answer is clearly no. And the reality is that favorite professor of yours today is spending a lot of his or her time in content preparation, delivering the same lecture year after year. That favorite professor of yours is spending a lot of time manually grading homeworks, grading stacks of homeworks year after year, maybe even same questions. And with this technology, what we can do is free up that favorite professor of yours from a lot of this repetitive work so that they have much more time to have those amazing conversations with students and to deliver the one-on-one mentoring, which I think is what they're probably really amazing at.
One more question here.
Yves Berthelot, Georgia Tech. I'm looking at the chart that is right here, and I'm just curious. So you've clearly shown that with the scale, now you really can dig and really understand better and develop new pedagogical tools to improve learning. I'm just curious do you think those tools might differ culturally, or geographically?
Yeah, yes, it's a very interesting question. It'd be interesting to figure that out. Let's see, we did some studies of, I think the answer is yes, we'll have to figure it out. So we did a study of plagiarism, for example, and it turned out that students in certain geographical areas plagiarize more. And after speaking with some students, we realized that it was our fault, that turns out different students from different cultures grow up with wildly varying expectations of what is and what isn't plagiarism. Here in the US, we think, these things are okay and these things are not. In certain cultures, you're expected to share your work with your friends. I mean, you'd be such a jerk to not show your work to your best friend. Like, don't be a jerk. So to them, it was very different what the right thing to do is. And we realized that we were not accurately messaging our academic standards across the cultures, and when we changed our messaging, that became much better across a range of cultures. So that was just one thing that we discovered that was different across cultures. I'm sure there'll be other things we'll discover in the future as well.
So Andrew, thank you. Can we thank Andrew one more time?
Okay, thank you.